Villains are one of, if not the most important part of a story. They are often the people starting conflict and progressing the plot forward. Creating a perfect villain is a rarity that few mangakas have been able to achieve. But creating a perfect villain only a few years into a mangaka's career, that is something I've only ever seen one man achieve. This is how Hirohiko Araki wrote the perfect villain, Dio Brando. Like most villains, Dio's childhood was a troubled one. He grew up in the dark slums of London. His parents were Dario Brando and an unnamed woman. Dio's mother is described to be the embodiment of kindness and was always seeking to help others, even to her own detriment. On the other hand, Dario Brando is an abusive, thieving alcoholic that drove Dio's mother to an early grave. From a young age, Dio blamed his father for his mother's death, so when he was 13, he acquired some poison and slowly poisoned his father to his grave. This is a great backstory for a villain. Having Dio's mother described as such a good person makes me wonder if Dio truly would have been evil at all if she was still alive to take care of him, as her death is what sent Dio down the path of villainy in the beginning. This backstory makes Dio, at least in the beginning, a morally grey character, as we know why he's doing the evil things that he does and can somewhat sympathize with him. It makes sense why Dio would resent Jonathan in the beginning. It must be hard seeing someone with such a perfect life, a good parental figure, and lots of money when you've been missing all those things your entire life. Now that we're here, I want to talk about how Dio is the perfect foil to Jonathan. Araki has spoken extensively about how he developed Jonathan and Dio to be direct opposites of each other. As mentioned before, Dio came from the slums while Jonathan came from a noble and rich family. Dio has an abusive father and Jonathan has a supportive father, most of the time. I think this contrast is most present in their character designs. Dio is blonde and Jonathan is brown-haired, at least until the anime spilled some paint. In regards to how he contrasts with Jonathan, I wanted to tackle how you'd represent the ultimate villain as depicted against the symbol of justice. How exactly would he fall into that role of villain? People always love to compare who's stronger or who's cooler. You've got Godzilla versus Mechagodzilla, Schwarzenegger versus Stallone. I wanted there to be that sort of contrast between Dio and Jonathan. I think Araki definitely succeeded in creating this contrast between Dio and Jonathan, as these two characters are truly perfect foils for each other, even just looking at the way they stand. Jonathan is broad-shouldered, standing tall and proud, but with a serious and determined look on his face, while Dio, again, is the opposite. He never stands up straight, but doesn't slouch either. He's casually leaning back, his spine inhumanly curving like vines, his face always contorted into a crooked smile. I like how before even knowing that Dio is a vampire, you can tell that he's not a normal human. That is what makes his character design amazing. Going back to what I said earlier about Dio being a morally great character in the beginning, this completely shatters after the time skip. Now 20 years old, Dio attempts to poison Jonathan's father in the same way he poisoned his own. This action is where I see the fine line in Dio, where his actions can no longer be excused because of his childhood. In chapter 11 of Phantom Blood, Speedwagon says, "I've never met someone as rotten as you. A product of your environment? I think not. He was born this way." Dio now knows exactly what he wants and will stop at nothing to see this wish come to fruition. How far can a man's ambition drive him when he takes it to the ultimate extreme? That's what I wanted to depict. In Dio's case, his ambition is the root of his evil. At this point in the story, Dio's goal is to steal the Joestar fortune from George Joestar. Already a pretty ambitious goal, but it pales in comparison to what his goals are in the future. But Dio's ambition isn't the only thing that makes him evil. Dio's charisma and natural ability to control others is truly his most terrifying ability. Dio possesses a natural charisma that can make some of the most strong-willed people follow his orders. This is only heightened when he gains vampiric abilities and is able to straight up mind control people. Dio wasn't simply a strong villain, but a character that controls others and had admirers that served him. As an antagonist, it makes it suspenseful for the reader, as they wonder how he can be beaten. This quote is interesting, as Araki talks about how people wonder how Dio can be beaten, because throughout Phantom Blood, it truly does feel like Dio has no weakness, something we later found out was intentional. During serialization, I hadn't actually prepared a weakness for Dio. It's the best kind of suspense when you're on edge. How will they overcome him if Hamon doesn't work? The stronger the enemy, the better. It was hard coming up with a way for him to be defeated though. This was a very risky decision for Araki. He could have easily written himself into a corner, but thankfully, Araki came up with a great weakness for Dio. When it comes to pure strength and intelligence, Dio is much stronger than Jonathan. I and many other readers were keenly aware of this fact when approaching the ending of Phantom Blood, and were wondering how Jonathan will overcome Dio's evil. And the answer wasn't from Jonathan powering up or something and winning with the power of friendship. It was because of Dio's shortcomings. Throughout Phantom Blood, Dio is fascinated with his newfound vampiric abilities. He experiments with them and attempts to push his body to the extreme. This by itself isn't a detriment to Dio's strength. He learns new ways to defeat his enemies and grows stronger stronger because of it. Where it does become a detriment is when Dio's fascination with his abilities causes him to prioritize experimentation over the defeat of his enemies. During the fight in the castle, Dio could have easily just used his Space Ripper stingy eyes to vaporize Jonathan's brain as soon as he walked through the door. In Part 2 Battle Tendency, Straizo says, Dio made a mistake. His mistake was that he enjoyed his abilities too much. He wanted to know the limits of what he could do, so he experimented. He left an opening for Jonathan to get him. This weakness was not present in Jonathan and Dio's final fight, however, on the boat. Here Dio enters the fight with one goal: kill Jonathan Joestar. While watching this for the first time, I once again had the question of how Jonathan is going to defeat Dio this time. Dio isn't going to make any careless mistakes this time, so what chance does Jonathan have at winning? Once again, Araki gave us the best answer he could think of. Jonathan doesn't win. In interviews, Araki talks extensively about how he favors Dio over Jonathan. The title of the series is JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, but first and foremost, I actually wanted to draw Dio. It's plain to see why Araki sees Dio this way. He is objectively a better written character. When developing the two characters as foils, it's clear that in some aspects Jonathan was created to be the opposite of Dio and not his own character. Jonathan was written to be the absolute definition of righteousness and good. This gave him no leeway for him to question his morals and made him a very one-dimensional character that's difficult to experiment with. Dio is not like this. While he is the symbol of evil and malice, it's not as binding as Jonathan. Dio is allowed to have morally gray scenes and evolve as a character. Another way that Dio was able to be more well written than Jonathan is because Dio's story doesn't conclude in Phantom Blood. The reason why I felt comfortable titling this video How Araki Wrote the Perfect Villain is because when it comes to Dio and Phantom Blood, I literally cannot think of a single thing that could have made this character better. Throughout the sea of mediocre characters in Part 1, Dio is the only one that I think has no flaws. He's the diamond in the rough, and it appears that Araki shares this opinion as well. Throughout interviews, Araki has no qualms talking about his dissatisfaction with how he wrote Jonathan Joestar, but I can't find an interview where he ever talks badly about how he wrote Dio. Dio's perfection doesn't just come with how he has nothing bad about him, because he also has many aspects of himself that go above and beyond. His pure charisma makes him so easy to hate, and the horrible things he ends up doing, like making a mother cannibalize her own child, is some pretty messed up stuff. He's the absolute perfect villain on his own, and especially when compared and contrasted with Jonathan. In my video about Jonathan Joestar, I talked about while he himself didn't live on, his legacy certainly did, with all of his descendants carrying on the torch of his goodness. Dio is similar to this, but with one major difference. Instead of Dio's legacy living on, Dio himself lives on to continue spreading his evil. But that, my friends, is a story for another day. Thank you all so much for watching. Sorry I was gone for a while. Okay, maybe it was a little more than a while, but I'm back now. If you want to see more videos like this, subscribing or hitting the like button would be greatly appreciated. Anyways, I'll see you in some more videos soon. See ya!